Close your eyes, dear listener. Let the noise of the day melt away. Allow each breath to slow, like a soft breeze drifting through ancient ruins. Tonight, we set sail to The Disappearance of D.B. Cooper.
The sky above Portland was the color of gunmetal when he stepped onto the tarmac. No one remembered his face clearly, not the ticket agent, not the stewardess who took his boarding pass, not even the man in the terminal who swore they'd shared a drink. But they all remembered the briefcase. Black, worn, ordinary. The man was polite, unhurried.
"Name?" the agent asked.
"Dan Cooper," he said, his voice as smooth as still water. The Boeing 727 waited like a promise in the drizzle. Flight 305, Northwest Orient, Portland to Seattle. Short hop, forgettable. But by the time the wheels touched down in Seattle, his name would be carved into the spine of every newspaper in America. The passengers never saw the note. Folded small, slipped across to the stewardess like a secret no one else should hear. She thought it was a phone number at first, another businessman chasing a lonely layover. But when she looked down, the words froze the blood in her veins. "I have a bomb. Sit next to me."
She sat. She smiled, like they trained her to. She listened as the man in the dark suit spoke, calm and clear, as if ordering dinner. $200,000 in unmarked bills, 4 parachutes, a fuel truck ready in Seattle, no sudden moves. When the FBI asked her later to describe his voice, she said it was strange, not angry, not afraid, just steady, like a man reading a grocery list.
The storm was building by the time they landed. Passengers offloaded, smiling awkwardly, some waving, unaware that the man in seat 18C had just hijacked their plane. The crew stayed. The briefcase never left his side. No one ever saw what was inside, only a glimpse of wires, red and black, and something that looked enough like a battery to keep everyone still. The money came. Bundles stacked in a canvas bag. 4 parachutes, 2 military, 2 civilian. The crew refueled under the man's watchful eye. And then, at 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off again.
They say the last anyone saw of him was somewhere over the Cascade Mountains, a black figure against a bruised purple sky. He lowered the rear stairs himself, wind tearing at his suit, tie snapping like a whip. "Godspeed," one steward whispered, though whether it was for him or for themselves, no one could say. And then he was gone. By morning, the storm had swallowed him. No body, no parachute, no trace but the torn stair handle and an empty night sky. The FBI combed the forests, the rivers, the ridges of Mount St. Helens. Hunters joined in, then treasure seekers, then conspiracy theorists, all looking for a man who might have died the second he jumped or might have walked out of the trees laughing, bills stuffed in his pockets. The newspapers gave him a name, D.B. Cooper, an error in the first frantic hours of reporting, but the name stuck like myth.
And with the name came the stories. Some said he landed safe and vanished into a new life, sipping drinks on a beach in Mexico, his briefcase buried in the sand. Others swore he worked for the CIA, that the hijacking was never about money, but about something deeper, darker, sealed in government vaults. And then there were the older stories, the ones whispered in logging towns and fishing bars along the Columbia River. Stories about the Sky Man, a restless spirit that rode the windstorms of the Pacific Northwest, a trickster, a thief, sometimes a savior, sometimes a demon. Maybe Cooper didn't vanish, an old fisherman told a reporter in 1977, eyes glassy with bourbon. Maybe he just went home.
By the time Evelyn Hart first heard this story, decades later, the man himself had become a ghost. She was 10, sitting cross-legged in her grandfather's living room, a black and white television flickering grainy footage of the FBI agents combing through pine forests. Her grandfather leaned close, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some men," he said, "aren't meant to be caught." She never forgot that.
Years later, Evelyn would grow into the kind of journalist who chased ghosts, unsolved disappearances, lost treasures, the places where history cracked wide enough for myth to seep in. But D.B. Cooper was different, because no matter where she went, no matter how many stories she wrote, his shadow followed, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she always wondered if the man in the black suit was still out there, waiting, watching, smiling behind those mirrored aviators. That winter, a boy found a bundle of bills on the banks of the Columbia River, decayed and half buried in the sand. The serial numbers matched. The FBI called it evidence. The locals called it an offering. Half a century later, no one could agree on what had really happened. The FBI closed the case. Theories multiplied like wildfire. Some said he died in the fall. Some said he lived, vanished into anonymity, maybe even started a family, the legend never crossing his quiet suburban street. Others believed he was never a man at all, just a story wearing a human shape. And when the storms rolled in off the Pacific, rattling the windows and snapping branches like bones, people still claimed they saw him, a figure in a dark suit, standing at the tree line, watching, waiting.
Evelyn didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But when the letter arrived, slipped under her office door without a stamp or return address, she felt the old shiver of childhood, that electric hum that said, "This is different." The paper was thick, old, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. "You've been looking for me. Stop." At the bottom, a single name, signed in black ink.
Evelyn stared at the envelope for a long time before she opened it. The newsroom around her buzzed with the usual late-night chaos, police scanners chattering, printers spitting ink, the clatter of keyboards like rain on metal. But all of it faded, as if the letter had pulled her into a quieter, stranger world. The paper smelled faintly of smoke, not cigarette smoke, older, like the dry, burnt tang of pine on a campfire. The words were neat, every curve precise. "You've been looking for me. Stop." And below, that name, written as if it still meant something. D.B. Cooper.
She laughed at first, nervous, brittle. A prank, she thought. It had to be. But then she noticed the paper, thick, like the kind used for government memos in the 1970s, and the ink, deep black, soaked into the fibers, not from a modern pen, but from something older. More unsettling was the address on the front. No stamp, no postmark, just her name. Someone had hand-delivered it. Evelyn slipped the letter back into the envelope and left the office early. The city was quiet that night. Portland always seemed quieter in the rain, the streets shining under the hum of sodium lamps. She walked fast, the envelope burning cold in her pocket, until she reached the steel bridge over the Willamette. Below, the river rolled black and silent. "Who the hell are you?" she whispered, voice lost in the mist.
At home, she couldn't sleep. Her walls were covered in clippings, maps, photographs, 50 years of dead ends and half-truths about the man called D.B. Cooper. Witness sketches that never matched. FBI memos with more black bars than words. The famous $20 bills found along the Columbia's banks in 1980. And now, this. She poured herself a drink, whiskey neat, and sat in the dim light of her kitchen, staring at the letter. Stop. But she wasn't going to stop. If anything, the letter meant she was closer than ever.
By morning, she was back in the newsroom, coffee in hand, eyes sharp despite the restless night. She pulled every file she had, reading through them again like she'd missed something. And maybe she had. A pattern no one had noticed. A name buried in a witness statement. A plane route plotted a degree too far north. At noon, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Hart," a voice said when she answered, deep, even, the kind of voice that made you want to sit still. "You got my letter." Her mouth went dry. "Who is this?" A pause, soft static on the line. "They think I'm dead," the voice said. "Let them." "D.B. Cooper," she said, testing the name like a curse. Another pause, then, "Names are masks. You, of all people, should know that." She almost laughed. "This is insane. You're dead. You've been dead for 50 years. "Maybe." The voice was calm, almost amused. "Maybe not." "Why contact me?" "Because you're not looking for a man. You're looking for a story. And stories are dangerous." The line clicked dead before she could speak again. For the rest of the day, Evelyn felt the weight of invisible eyes. Every street corner, every reflection in a cafe window. A man in a gray hat watching her across the street. A woman in a trench coat staring too long in the subway. By nightfall, paranoia had set in like a fever. Back at her apartment, she found another letter waiting under her door. This one was shorter. Just 3 words written in that same deliberate hand. Follow the river.
The Columbia, of course. Every legend, every theory, every map circled back to the river, to the black water, where a boy had once found bundles of rotting bills, where hunters swore they'd seen parachute straps tangled in branches high up the cliffs. She packed a bag, camera, notebook, recorder. The old revolver she kept locked in the desk drawer just in case. And at dawn, Evelyn drove north, toward the endless gray sprawl of the Pacific Northwest wilderness. The road wound along the river, the forest rising like a wall of green and shadow on either side. Rain slicked the asphalt, the kind of steady drizzle that blurred the world into watercolor. Every so often, she'd catch a glimpse of something in the trees, a flash of dark fabric, a shape gone too quickly to name. By the time she reached the little town of Ariel, Washington, the gas tank was almost empty. Ariel was a ghost of a place. One diner, one gas pump, a few scattered houses with peeling paint and sagging roofs. But the locals still talked about him, voices low, as if speaking his name too loud might call him back. At the diner, she asked the waitress, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, if anyone had seen anything strange. The woman hesitated, then leaned close. "Strange," she said. "Out here? Strange is normal. But if you're talking about him..." She tilted her head toward the river. "Check the bend past Miller's Bluff. People say that's where he likes to watch the water." Evelyn drove until the road turned to gravel, then to dirt. The river was a ribbon of steel below the cliffs, cold and fast, the current whispering like a secret. She climbed down the bank, boots sinking in wet earth, the air sharp with pine and rain. Halfway down, she saw it, a strip of fabric caught high in the branches, faded gray, torn at the edges. Her camera clicked once, twice, and then she heard it. A voice, quiet but clear, carried by the wind. "You're getting close."
The trees were still. The river kept whispering, but Evelyn felt it. The same electric hum from the letter, the same sense that the story had just shifted, the ground tilting under her feet. She raised her camera again, but the frame was empty. No figure, no movement, just the forest, watching. That night, she camped near the river, the fire hissing in the drizzle, her notebook open on her knees. She wrote everything down: the letter, the phone call, the strip of fabric, the voice in the trees, as if the act of writing could make sense of it. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called, and far off, carried by the wind and the rush of the river, came a sound that froze her blood. A laugh. Low, quiet, and familiar.
Morning came heavy and gray. Evelyn woke to the smell of wet pine and ash, her notebook still open in her lap. The fire had died sometime in the night, leaving only a curl of smoke and the hollow quiet of the woods. For a moment she thought she'd dreamed the voice, the laugh, but then she saw the footprints, not hers. Fresh in the mud near the river's edge, sharp, deliberate prints that disappeared into the tree line. She followed them. The forest was still, every sound sharpened, the drip of rain from the branches, the distant rush of water, the creak of trees in the wind. The tracks led her along the river, winding deeper into the woods, until they stopped abruptly at a clearing. At the center, half buried in moss and mud, was a rusted parachute buckle. She knelt, brushed the dirt away. It was real, heavy in her hand, cold despite the morning air. The sound of wings startled her. A raven lifting from the branches, black feathers slicing the air like knives. And then the voice again. "Closer than you think." She froze. The words came from nowhere and everywhere, a whisper tangled in the river wind. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" No answer. Only the slow rush of the Columbia, relentless and patient. By noon, she was back in Ariel, the buckle in her pocket. The diner was busier now. Loggers, truckers, a few fishermen shaking off the rain. She slid into a booth and laid the buckle on the table, letting the overhead light catch on its rusted edges. The waitress with the sharp eyes saw it, stopped mid-step. "Where'd you find that?" Evelyn looked up. Near the bend. The woman's face went pale. She sat down across from Evelyn without asking, her hands folded tight. My father was on the search team, she said quietly. The first one, after it happened. They combed every inch of that forest, found scraps, rope, straps, torn fabric, but nothing like this. Nothing that... clean. Evelyn frowned. Clean? It's rusted to hell. The woman shook her head. You don't understand. The river eats out here. Metal, fabric, wood, gone in a season. That buckle, she leaned closer. That buckle should have disappeared decades ago. Evelyn turned the piece of metal over in her hand, feeling the weight of time in it. She asked, What do you think it means? The woman's gaze flicked toward the window, to the endless gray stretch of river beyond. She whispered, Some people say he never left, that the river keeps him, that when the storms come, you can hear him, walking the banks, watching. Like a ghost? A humorless smile, like something older than a ghost.
That night, Evelyn didn't sleep in the woods. She booked a room above the diner, a single window overlooking the bend in the river, the glass rattling softly in the wind. She laid the buckle on the nightstand beside her notebook, her camera, her phone. Evidence, she told herself, nothing more. But sometime after midnight, she woke to the sound of static. Her recorder, the one she'd switched off hours ago, was on, the red light blinking. A voice crackled through the speaker, low and steady. You're chasing shadows, Evelyn. She sat up fast, heart pounding. Who are you? She whispered into the dark. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it said, Follow the current. The truth is buried where the river breaks. Then, silence. By dawn, she was driving upriver. The road narrowed to a single lane, twisting between cliffs and water, until the trees swallowed everything. No towns, no signs, just the endless roar of the Columbia and the pale light of morning cutting through the mist. She stopped where the current split, a jagged fork around a cluster of black rocks rising from the river like teeth. And there, tangled in the roots at the water's edge, was another piece of the puzzle. A piece of fabric. Dark gray. Nylon. Faded, but unmistakable.
Evelyn crouched by the bank, fingers trembling as she pulled the fabric free. It was stiff, waterlogged, but still held the faint smell of oil and rain. Her camera clicked. 1, 2, 3 shots. Evidence. But then something shifted in the air. A pressure, like the world holding its breath. She turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. And yet she knew she wasn't alone. The voice came again, closer this time, almost warm. Why do you think they never found me? Evelyn swallowed hard. Because you're dead. A low chuckle rolled through the trees. Dead is a story they tell to sleep at night. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then what are you? She asked. Silence, thick and endless. Then, softly, a man once, a myth now. And myths don't die.
The sky broke open with rain,
sharp and cold, drenching her in seconds. She stumbled back to the car, clutching the fabric, the weight of it heavy and unreal. When she looked up, just before the engine roared to life, she saw him. A figure at the edge of the trees. Tall, still. Dark suit, white shirt, tie loose in the wind. A face hidden by the shadow of a hat and mirrored glasses that caught the stormlight. And then he was gone, like a photograph burned too fast. By the time she made it back to town, her hands were shaking. She locked the door to her room, spread the evidence across the bed. The buckle, the fabric, the recordings. Patterns began to emerge. Every place she'd been, every clue, every voice. It all traced the river, as if he was leading her somewhere. That night, the storm returned, and with it, another letter slipped under her door. This one was wet, the ink smeared, but legible. You wanted the truth. Meet me where the river dies. No signature this time. But she didn't need one.
The Columbia widens near its mouth where it spills into the Pacific. Locals call it the graveyard of the coast, a stretch of shifting sandbars and violent tides that has swallowed ships for centuries. Where the river dies, the old fishermen say, the sea takes what it wants. Evelyn drove through the night, the storm lashing the highway, wipers struggling against the sheets of rain. Each mile felt heavier, the world narrowing to black asphalt, white lines, and the restless hum of the river that never seemed to leave her ears. By dawn, the road ended. The town of Hammond was more memory than place. Weathered docks, a handful of houses leaning against the wind, boats tethered like broken bones. She parked near the jetty, stepping into the cold brine air. The Pacific stretched out in front of her, gray and endless, the horizon blurred into the storm. In her pocket, the last letter burned like a brand. Meet me where the river dies. The beach was empty except for gulls and driftwood scattered like bones. She walked until the sand turned to wet stone, her boots slipping on moss. That's when she saw it. A shape on the rocks ahead. A man, tall, shoulders squared, a dark coat whipping in the wind. The same figure from the trees. She stopped, several paces away, heart hammering. "You," she said. The man turned slowly. The aviators caught the light. Two small suns in the gray dawn. The face beneath them was older than the sketches, lined by time and weather, but unmistakable. D.B. Cooper. "You wanted the truth," he said. His voice was the same, calm, steady, like the night on the plain. Evelyn swallowed hard. "What are you?" He smiled, just barely. "A question you already know the answer to?" She stepped closer, the surf crashing against the rocks below. "You jumped from that plane in 1971. People searched for weeks. They found nothing. How am I standing here?" His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I didn't fall. Not the way they think I did." The wind howled, lifting the hem of his coat. "Do you believe in places," he said softly, "where time folds in on itself, where the world forgets what year it is, what decade, what rules it's supposed to follow?" Evelyn hesitated. "No."
"You should," Cooper said, "because you've been walking through one since you came here. The river carries more than water. It carries memory, debt. Sometimes it carries men like me."
She shook her head. "You expect me to believe you're, what, some kind of ghost?" "I'm not a ghost," he said, stepping closer, boots silent on the wet stone. "I'm what happens when a story refuses to end. They wrote me into legend, Evelyn, and legends don't die. They just wait." The air shifted, sharp and electric, as if the storm itself leaned in to listen. "Why me?" she asked, voice trembling despite her best effort. "Because you're the only one still looking for the truth. And the truth," his gaze flicked toward the horizon where the sky bled into the sea, "isn't what you think it is." The waves surged, spraying salt and foam over the rocks. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me why you jumped. Tell me what you found." For a long moment, he was silent. Then, "They think I wanted money. They think I wanted to disappear. But the money was never the point. It was a key, something to buy my way in." "In where?" He gestured to the horizon. "Out there, beyond the breakers. There's a place where the river stops pretending to be a river, where it becomes something else." The wind roared, and for a heartbeat, Evelyn thought she saw shapes moving on the distant waves, shadows, tall and spindly, standing impossibly still on the water's surface. She blinked, and they were gone. "You're insane," she whispered, though it sounded weak even to her. "Maybe," Cooper said. "Or maybe I've just been out here too long. Time doesn't move the same way past the mouth of the river. Some nights, I swear I can still hear the engines, the storm, the wind tearing at my chute. Other nights—" His eyes, hidden behind the glasses, seemed to glint. "I hear nothing at all." Evelyn tightened her grip on her camera, forcing her voice steady. "If what you're saying is true, then why now? Why reach out to me?" "Because the river is restless," Cooper said, stepping closer. "It's waking up, and when it wakes, it wants to be fed." The sky darkened, the storm pressing closer, lightning flickering far out at sea. "I don't understand," she said. "You will," he said. "Soon. But you need to make a choice, Evelyn. Walk away now, or follow the current to the end. There's no coming back from the end." The surf thundered, swallowing his last words. When she blinked, he was gone. No sound of footsteps, no shadow on the rocks. Only the waves and the rain, and the letter in her pocket, suddenly soaked through, the ink bleeding until the words blurred into black smears. By the time she made it back to the diner, night had fallen again. The buckle and the fabric lay on the table beside her notebook, the evidence of a story that no longer felt entirely human. She stared at the empty page, pen in hand, but the words wouldn't come. Somewhere beyond the glass, the river moved, slow and patient, whispering against the banks. And for the first time, Evelyn wondered if her grandfather had been right all along, if some men weren't meant to be caught because they were never men to begin with. She barely slept. When she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of falling. The roar of the engines, the scream of the wind, the ground below, a blur of black forest and silver water, and always, just before impact, that same laugh, low and steady, cutting through the storm. Morning brought no clarity, only rain, and another letter waiting at her door. The paper was wet, the edges torn,
but the writing was sharp as ever. Tomorrow, midnight. Bring nothing but the questions you can't stop asking. No signature. None needed. The river was a mirror at night. Not smooth, not calm, but alive. The current twisted under the moonlight, black and silver like something breathing. Evelyn stood at the edge of the dock, her flashlight off, her breath fogging in the cold air. The small boat tied to the cleat bobbed with the tide, the oarlocks creaking like bones. She checked her watch. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until midnight. The letter's words burned in her pocket. Tomorrow, midnight. Bring nothing but the questions you can't stop asking. She almost turned back. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea, that following a ghost onto the river in the dead of night was the kind of decision you didn't get to regret. But curiosity was stronger than fear. It always had been. And so, at exactly midnight, she untied the boat and pushed off into the current. The oars dipped silently into the water, the river swallowing every sound. The lights of the town faded behind her, swallowed by the mist that rolled thick across the surface. She rowed until her arms burned, the muscles in her shoulders tight, her breath sharp in the icy air. And then she stopped. Because the river had stopped. It wasn't possible. The Columbia was never still. But here, in the center of the channel, the current froze. The water went flat, black as polished glass, reflecting the moon in perfect clarity. And then she heard it. The hum. Low at first, like distant thunder, building until it was everywhere, in her bones, in her teeth, in the steady, frantic rhythm of her heart.
Evelyn. His voice came from the fog, steady and calm, carrying across the water like it had been waiting there all along. She turned, and there he was, standing in a second boat that hadn't been there moments before. The same dark suit, the same white shirt, the same mirrored glasses that caught the moonlight, but revealed nothing beneath. "You came," he said. She gripped the oars tighter, her voice thin but steady. "You wanted questions. I brought them." "Good." He dipped his hand into the black water, the surface rippling in slow, deliberate waves. "But you won't like the answers." The mist thickened, curling low around the boats, swallowing the world beyond the reach of moonlight. "What is this place?" Evelyn asked, her breath shallow in her throat. "A crossroads," he said simply. "Where the river dies, everything that's been lost finds its way back. Time, memory, men like me." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "You jumped from that plane. You should have died." "I did." The word hung in the air like a verdict. "Then how are you here?" He smiled faintly. "Because death is just another current, and some of us learn how to swim." Evelyn stared at him, the river silent around them, the hum vibrating through her ribs. "You're saying you've been here, what, all this time?" "Time doesn't mean what you think it does. Out there, 50 years pass. In here," he tilted his head, the glasses flashing, "it's always the same night. The jump, the fall, the choice."
The mist shifted, and for a moment Evelyn saw it. Shadows in the fog, shapes that looked almost human, watching silently from the edges of the river. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Others," Cooper said. The ones who fell, the ones the world forgot, pilots, sailors, soldiers, names you've never heard, names you'd recognize from headlines. The river keeps what it wants. "Why me?" she asked, her voice sharp now. "Because you're still listening," he said. "Most people stop. They write it off as history or coincidence or madness, but you kept following the current. And the current," his gaze lingered on her, unreadable behind the mirrored lenses, "has chosen you." The boat rocked gently beneath her, the still water shifting like breath. "Chosen me for what?" "To decide," he said simply. The hum deepened, thrumming through the air, through the wood of the boat, through the marrow of her bones. "You can leave now," Cooper said. "Row back to shore. Pretend you never found the letters, never heard the voice in the trees, never stood here. Live your life, forget this river." "And if I don't?" His smile sharpened, not unkind, but heavy, inevitable. "Then you go where I went, past the breakers, into the place where stories stop being stories." She gripped the edge of the boat, her knuckles white. "And what's out there?" His silence was answer enough. The shadows in the mist shifted again, closer now, the outlines of figures almost solid, men in uniforms from wars long past, women in faded dresses, faces blurred but eyes sharp, unblinking, watching her, waiting.
The hum rose until it was almost a roar, the water vibrating with a strange electric charge. And then, silence. The river stilled completely. And for the first time, Evelyn saw something beneath the surface. Not her reflection, but flashes of other places, other times. A rain-soaked forest, a roaring engine, a man stepping out of a plane door into the storm. Her breath caught. This isn't possible." "Neither was I," Cooper said softly. The boat drifted, carried by a current she couldn't feel but somehow knew was there, pulling her slowly, steadily toward the mouth of the river and the endless stretch of black ocean beyond. "Make your choice, Evelyn," Cooper said, his voice quiet now, almost kind. "Go back or follow me. But understand, if you go forward, there's no coming home." The ocean boomed in the distance, waves crashing like distant drums. The mist closed tighter, the world shrinking to the boat, the man, and the dark water beneath her feet. Evelyn closed her eyes, and in the darkness she saw her grandfather's face, weathered and kind, whispering over the hum of the television the night she first learned his name. "Some men aren't meant to be caught." When she opened her eyes, she wasn't afraid. "I want the truth," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Cooper tilted his head as if studying her for the first time. Then he nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Then hold on," he said. The river lurched beneath her, the boat snapping forward as if pulled by invisible hands. The hum returned, deafening now, the water boiling in a sudden violent surge. The mist closed tighter, the world shrinking to the boat, the man, and the dark water beneath her feet. And Evelyn Hart followed D.B. Cooper into the black mouth of the Pacific, where the river dies and legends are born. The world shattered as they crossed the line where the river met the sea.
One moment, Evelyn was in her boat, the cold Pacific roaring beneath her. The next, there was only silence, thick, absolute, suffocating. The water was still now, an endless plain of glass beneath a sky that wasn't a sky at all. It was colorless, infinite, like someone had drained the world of sound and light. Cooper stood at the bow of his boat, his coat unmoving in the dead air, his mirrored glasses catching a light that wasn't there. "Welcome," he said quietly, "to the place where stories end." Evelyn clutched the sides of her boat, her pulse thundering. "What is this?" "The current," Cooper said. "Everything the river carries, everything that's lost, forgotten, abandoned, it comes here." Evelyn swallowed hard. "This is where you've been." "Yes, not living, not dead, just waiting." She looked at him, her voice sharp. "Waiting for what?" His smile was faint but sad. "For someone to follow the current, for someone to ask the questions no one else dared to." A faint hum rose from the water, vibrating through the hull of her boat into her bones. And then, out of the mist, shapes began to appear. Figures. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe. Men in uniforms from wars long past, pilots in leather jackets, sailors in caps bleached by time, women in faded dresses from decades before she was born.
"They're the others," Cooper said softly. "The ones who disappeared. Planes that vanished. Ships that never made port. People the world stopped looking for. And they're trapped here?" "Not trapped," he said. "Not exactly. They became what I became. Part of the story." Evelyn's hands trembled. "Why me? Why now?" "Because the river doesn't choose without reason," Cooper said. "It brought you here because it wants you to understand what everyone else refused to see. Legends don't just happen. They're made. And once they're made—" He looked out over the glassy horizon, voice low and steady. "They live forever." The hum deepened, the water rippling with slow, deliberate waves. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't need to," Cooper said. "You just need to decide. The current brought you here because you have two choices." He turned toward her, the reflection of the nothingness shining in his glasses. "You can go back, wake up in your boat with nothing but questions and a story no one will believe. Or you can stay, become part of it, like me, like them." Evelyn stared at the water, at the endless expanse of gray, the faces watching silently. Back home, she had an empty apartment, a stack of notebooks, a career built on chasing ghosts. But here was the truth. "What happens if I stay?" she asked. His expression didn't change, but his voice softened. "Then you stop being Evelyn Hart. You stop being a woman. You become the story, the next voice in the trees, the next shadow on the riverbank. Eternal." Her chest tightened. "And if I go back? Then you'll remember this place like a dream, a story you almost told. But the river won't call you again. Not in this life."
The water stilled again. The hum faded to a whisper, like the world holding its breath, waiting for her answer. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of her grandfather, of the night she first heard the story on that flickering black and white screen. She thought of the years she'd spent chasing a man who might have never existed, and of the letter that had appeared on her desk, the voice that had guided her here, the truth waiting in the current. When she opened her eyes, she looked straight at him. "I want to stay." For the first time, Cooper smiled. Not the sharp, cold smile of a myth, but something softer, almost human. "Then hold on," he said. The water exploded. The hum roared, deafening, vibrating through her teeth, her bones, her blood. The boat rocked violently as the current surged beneath her, pulling her down, down, into the black. She didn't fight it. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was Cooper, standing at the bow of his boat, still and steady, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for half a century. Silence. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was standing on the riverbank. Not the real riverbank, not the muddy, rain-slicked edges of the Columbia, but a place that looked almost like memory. The air was warm, soft, heavy with the scent of pine. In the distance, she heard laughter, low, familiar.
She looked down. Her reflection shimmered in the water, but it wasn't her. Not exactly. She was older and younger all at once, her hair loose, her eyes sharp, her expression calm. Behind her, the river moved, always moving, always calling. And then she heard his voice, close now, almost in her ear. "Welcome to the current, Evelyn! Welcome to the story!" Somewhere, far away, the world went on. The Columbia kept flowing, the newspapers kept printing theories, the FBI kept their files sealed in dusty drawers. And sometimes, when the storms rolled in and the wind howled through the pines, people swore they saw her. A figure at the bend in the river, camera slung around her shoulder, eyes glinting like glass. Watching. Waiting. The legend of D.B. Cooper lived on. But now, the legend had company. And the river, restless, eternal, whispered a new name to anyone who dared to listen. Evelyn Hart.